He's the quintessential slacker. He drifts through space and time. He speaks in quips. He dresses as a signpost for another era. His car is ancient. He has a strange preoccupation with the small details of his life. His personality can be taken as charmingly nonchalant or maddeningly indifferent. He is the dude. But he is also this dude, and this is Duets. The film I'm talking about, of course, is The Big Lebowski, written and directed in 1998 by Joel and Ethan Coen. The movie is an homage of sorts to hard-boiled detective noirs of decades past, but given the usual screwball irreverence the Coens are famous for. The Big Lebowski nuzzles the same hip, slacker vibe of Richard Linklater.
All right.
Mimes the farcical shock comedy of peak Adam Sandler or the Farrelly Brothers.
His head fell off.
And manufactures characters with catchphrases that mimic the sitcom.
Smokey, this is not Nam, this is bowling. There are rules.
That TV quality permeates the plot as well, as it meanders from episode to episode, never really establishing much in the way of narrative momentum. The Long Goodbye, the film with the other dude, or El Duderino, if you're not into the whole brevity thing,
Excuse me.
is a 1973 film made by Robert Altman. It employs Altman's famous fly-on-the-wall style. No coverage, not now, not ever. But even so, it manages to give us a narrative through line. Philip Marlowe has been set up, wronged, and when he finally comes to, he's getting payback for it. These movies are kind of fraternal twins. Not identical, but speaking the same dialect and fixated on similar obsessions. The principal obsession for both is the exposure of the genre they inhabit, the film noir, or rather the noir film told through its most popular form, the detective story. And yes, I realize Jeff Lebowski is not a detective. We'll get to that. The dude, Walter, and poor Donnie, emblematic losers of Los Angeles, none of them have any real business being in this kind of story. A noirish detective mystery, that is. Half-assed grievances and slothful greed drive them.
The other Jeffrey Lebowski, the millionaire.
That's fucking interesting, man. That's fucking interesting.
These traits set the sleuths on their misadventures. Even the break from the norm that the kidnapping plot represents cannot ultimately rescue any of them from the margins of society. And perhaps they don't want to be rescued, I get it. But then why bother with being bagmen or double-crossers at all? They are contented but riven with hostility towards the upper class and jump at the chance to make money off of them. The bowling shtick becomes a kind of palliative for this hostility. The dude and Walter arrange their emotional lives such that bowling can mask their feelings or sublimate them.
Fuck it, dude. Let's go bowling.
Bowling is also the master distraction, useful for avoiding any circumstance that might break the cycle of defeat. The repetitive nature of the activity acts as a metaphor for this eternal recurrence of the same. The ball is thrown, it crashes into the pins, it is carried by conveyor belt, back to the bowler, rinse, repeat. Like the bedroom scenes that bookend the horrors of Fargo, where Marge and her husband portray Midwestern normalcy to the hilt, the bowling alley serves a similar purpose. The more things change temporarily, the more they stay the same long term.
Let's go bowling.
It's an observed, if unspoken, surrender of the individual inside the system. A system with cracks just big enough for the likes of Jeff and Walter to exist. This idea of people in the cracks or margins is operative in The Long Goodbye as well. When we first encounter Philip Marlowe, His inane nocturnal life presupposes an incredible lack of, shall we say, conventional ambition. He drifts through life, taking cases as they come. When his good friend Terry arrives out of the blue in the middle of the night and asks to be driven to Mexico, showing signs of being in a fight with his wife, Marlowe dutifully obliges. Lebowski, we imagine, would have done the same thing, unthinking, uncaring, just another far-out road trip to pass the time while smoking a roach and cranking the Creedence. Erik Dussere, in his study of the film noir style from the 1940s on, saw that by the 1970s the hard-boiled detective story of Raymond Chandler was losing its cultural purchase. Movies that acknowledge this loss of prestige, some of my all-time faves, by the way, Chinatown, Night Moves, and The Long Goodbye, he labels as anti-noir. He writes, quote, genres that had evolved gradually within a stable framework of conventions during the studio era now appeared in radically altered forms, all of them slouching toward conspiracy. These 1970s noirs rewrote hard-boiled fiction of the 40s like The Big Sleep, perhaps the most overt antecedent plot-wise for The Big Lebowski, to fit a world of instability and skepticism. The post-war boom was long over. The paranoid style had shifted from political right to left as the assassinations of the 1960s mounted. There were no unimpeachable authority figures anymore, so why should the detective in these sorts of stories be any different? In noirs of the 70s, there is no solving the crime, getting the girl, asserting some authentic self. At least not really. This foreclosure comes to life in Ned Beatty's apocalyptic diatribe in Network, which Dussere references. The true villains of Marlowe's time and Lebowski's are those which stay unnamed. The systems, corporations, governments, institutions, all interlacing with one another.
One vast and immane, interwoven, interacting, multivariate, multinational dominion of dollars.
The small bore mysteries in both films have a kind of temporal vertigo built in. It's the clanging of the 40s detective noir against another era. The dude in Marlowe's man-out-of-time quality assists with that feeling. The stakes, in a way, seem so insignificant. It's all rich people doing each other dirty and suckering poor slobs into helping. Why should we care? A movie like LA Confidential, I would argue, gets more to the heart of Network's global skepticism. By the end of it, the police are in bed with a crooked land developer and pimp, and running stolen heroin as well, spinning a colossal web of systemic evil that one hero cop is going to try and change from the inside.
Good luck, as if.
While the other, just hightails it out of town. Inside such labyrinthian power systems, the search for the authentic, which Dussere argues is what the noir tradition is all about, can no longer find a path to the outside of American consumer culture. He writes, quote, the crisis of noir at the moment of the emergence of postmodernism is that authenticity can only take the form of authenticity's absence. In The Long Goodbye, Philip Marlowe awakens as if Rip Van Winkle. It was written in the script that way. Robert Altman has stated as such many times. It's not conjecture. He is absolutely an anachronism. He dresses both slovenly and stuffy.
I wish you'd take that goddamn J.C. Penney tie off, huh?
He drives a 40s gangster-mobile. His catchphrase is slightly corny and old-fashioned sounding.
It's okay with me.
He makes references to long-retired baseball legends.
Who were the three DiMaggio brothers?
Vince, Durham, and, Joe?
Joe, yeah.
And just listen to this.
Smart ass.
Did you catch it? Listen again.
Smart ass.
The opening of The Big Lebowski is equally intentionally confusing about time, but it does so by doing the usual Coen brothers trick. a genre portmanteau of the Western and the noir.
They call Los Angeles
Northern?
the City of Angels.
A war?
I didn't find it to be that exactly.
We see a sentient tumbleweed ambling toward the LA basin.
Whoops, wrong movie.
Sam Elliott's Stranger
This
narrates.
here story I'm about to unfold.
The Coens repurpose one of the stereotypes of the noir, hard-boiled narration, into the mouth of a cowboy. The tumbleweed arrives at the ocean, the end of the line. Goodbye's incongruity, a 1940s gumshoe in 1970s far-out LA, and Lebowski's incongruity, a drifter standing in for the private eye, and a nameless cowboy setting the scene in voiceover, both suggest pretty strongly that Tinseltown had shed stable imaginary categories. Anti-noir deconstructions and pastiche remixes are what's left. It's LA, where the American dream has run out of gas and is lying stalled on the side of the road. In such a place, only the losers, the Marlowes and Lebowskis, can act as Virgil, leading us down into the bowels of depravity. The city, LA, has such a powerful internal light, all manner of strange wonders, that it doesn't let in much context. In Goodbye, we get one reference to the fact that Vietnam-style protests are still going on.
She's all right, man. She got busted at a protest rally. I had to bust a pig that busted her, man.
That the 60s aren't yet over. In Lebowski, it's the early 1990s, and the Gulf War is getting ready to happen.
This will not stand, this aggression against Kuwait.
But it comes across in the far background, like a TV show one could switch off. The only other mentions of the war are in the dude's dream world, where Saddam Hussein merges with bowling, merges with his repressed lust for Maud. What this conflation means, only Freud can disentangle. And this,
You know, this aggression will not stand, man.
the dude exposes Bush's rhetoric for the empty bluster it always was. So that's something, I suppose. The city is bifurcated according to class. For low-life bachelors like Marlowe and Lebowski, the scene is all-night grocery stores, dive bars, diners, bowling alleys. When they are summoned, it's to a world of old-money mansions or nouveau riche gated communities along the coast. Malibu is the hub of big-money glamour in both movies. It's where Jackie Treehorn lives and Roger Wade. Dussere pays close attention to the grocery store scenes which open both films. In The Long Goodbye, Marlowe's pedantic attention to finding just the right cat food is challenged by the grocery clerk, the same one he meets later while being booked, who says,
"Get this, mister, all this shit is the same anyway."
For Dussere, this is the director's way of conflating vapid American consumer culture in all its forms. Quote, "The noir and the supermarket are part of the same systems. The Hollywood film viewer is always a shopping consumer. And what we are fed, perhaps literally and figuratively, is crap. How we cement this connection between filmmaking and consumption is through the opening shot and music. We see a crude etching of palm trees entitled Hollywood, while a scratchy 78 of Hooray for Hollywood plays non-diegetically from the 1937 movie Hollywood Hotel, which predetermines both character and story as archaic and outdated. This is reinforced later with the security guard of the upscale Malibu enclave, who delights in doing classic Hollywood characters as a kind of toll to enter and exit.
I've never understood it, Walter. I just don't understand her first name.
Eileen.
Now, well, what's their address?
Jimmy Stewart?
Right.
For Dussere, there is no longer any special category of authenticity that the film noir can claim. It's all a part of the same industry. Commerce rules all facets of modern life. Such a cynical attitude is reshaped, fluffed, maybe, by the Coens. In the opening scene of The Big Lebowski, Jeff wanders the aisle looking for half and half to make his beloved White Russians. For the dude, bowling and shopping define his way of life, but are somehow both, quote, simultaneously inside and outside of the consumerist mainstream. Dussere finds in Jeff's leisurely lifestyle a political potential, an ethos, quote, trying to find a way to decouple itself from the alienating qualities of mainstream consumption. And while I would argue that the Gulf War references simply whip past most filmgoers, Dussere sees the Gulf War and the supermarket as conflations of consumerism, national identity, and foreign policy. The Dude is thus a kind of walking, talking critique of these conflations, played for laughs but with serious satirical undertones as he writes his check for 69 cents. When we learn that his Ralph's shopper's card is his only viable identification, the point is clear. He is slipping between the cracks of official ordering systems. But is there some point at which the system can be gotten past altogether? For Dussere, the Coens' postmodern oeuvre avoids conclusion. The Dude is ethos, but he is ethos without authenticity. The Long Goodbye was written by Lee Brackett, the legendary science fiction writer and screenwriter who had been around for the golden age of noir and lived to see and participate in what came after New Hollywood. Very early on in the movie, Brackett indicates through Marlowe a self-awareness of the kind of story he's in. In keeping with anti-noir inversions symptomatic of 70s cinema, the text often succumbs to the metatext.
That's where I'm supposed to say, what is all this about? And he says, shut up, I asked the question.
Yeah, that's right, Marlowe.
Hey, look, it's a bowling pin. Wow, that's weird.
Is a character out of sync with the time he lives, keeps his head down and tries to avoid trouble. Never does he suspect the web of lies and double crosses he will soon be drawn into. There's a young trophy wife, married to an abusive, domineering tyrant, a washed-up Hemingway knockoff, who may be up to no good herself. She's in deep with the local hood, and the guy she may be having an affair with is Marlowe's best friend. He promptly disappears with a whole lot of the mob's money, and they put the screws to Marlowe to try and get it back. We get the daffy mob henchmen, this guy and this one.
And look, it's Schwarzenegger, holy shit!
We get the sexually provocative females who live next door, constantly tempting Marlowe with their nude yoga. Marlowe is a bit of an ascetic, so he takes their antics with a smoke. In the end, Marlowe realizes he's been set up by someone he trusted. The mystery of his friend's suicide and his friend's wife's murder and the lost money has all been a kind of fake-out to keep him chasing his tail.
How you doing, Terry?
Marlowe has lost once more.
Marlowe?
The bones of that story scan across the Big Lebowski pretty neatly. As Jeff and Walter plunge into the LA nights, they come upon a similar whirlwind of oddities and grotesques. Maud, the feminist artiste, the laughing weirdo guy, David Thewlis! It's David f***ing Thewlis! The pudgy landlord who moonlights as an avant-garde dancer, the nihilist played by dead-eyed Peter Stormare, Flea, and some other guy, the narrating cowboy, the moronic henchman, the bellicose self-important rich guy, the drug-fueled nympho trophy wife, a pornographer behaving like a crime lord, etc., etc. It's a kind of Pinchonian.
Can I do that? Pinchonian? Especially since I've only read the short book.
Gambit, by way of Joyce. The Here Comes Everyone excess of the Coens is on full blast. But even more so than The Long Goodbye, it adds up to not a lot. And that's something we'll talk more about in a minute. Altman has a bang-up time with the music in The Long Goodbye. He was always a director with a lot on his mind, and more than anything, he was trying to show the audience to be all gullible rubes. Nowhere is this more transparent than in the chronically absurd overuse of the titular song,
Co-written by John Mother Williams, y'all.
which is constantly blended between diegetic and non-diegetic sound and sung or played in this many musical styles.
Hello, even when some answer.
Hard on, you know?
You have. He's right.
Hey, Mrs. Wade! Hey, no? I think it would be better if we talk in the car.
It's Marlowe's theme song, his Greek chorus commenting on the serial abandonment and betrayal he experiences. So it's not just for laughs, except by our recognition of it in different forms and contexts. But as that recognition starts to set in, our suspension of disbelief is in a way fatally wounded. Our sense of distrust of the medium, our paranoia, the defining feature of the postmodern anti-noir, fully comes into being. Like Long Goodbye, Lebowski opens with archaic songbook Americana, sons of the pioneers doing tumbling tumbleweeds. From there, it's a who's who of 60s boomer rock, curated by T-Bone Burnett of Oh Brother Where Art Thou fame. Bob Dylan's The Man in Me becomes a kind of motif. The La La La's an outward expression of the dude's inner lightness of being or his permanently drug-altered consciousness. Potato, patata. The other song, to accompany a flight of hallucinatory fantasy, is New Edition's... Hold on, that can't be right. I mean, the first editions just dropped in. This is The Gambler in early rock mode, R.I.P. There's plenty of Creedence, Captain Beefheart, an instrumental version of Hotel California played over Jesus' intro, one of the many Coen grotesques, thus apropos as a theme song because in a later callback, the dude, shall we say, expresses his dislike for Las Aguilas.
Fucking Eagles, man.
The music is both with the dude and his adventures and a tool for condescension. It audibly reinforces Jeff's reductive lifestyle, his attention to pop consumer minutia.
You're lucky they left the tape deck, though, in the Creedence.
However idiosyncratic, and we watch and feel superior because we have much more important things on our minds. But the Coens, like Altman, know that isn't true. Our laughter at the dude's expense is really at our expense. The audience is always the butt of the joke. The Coens clearly took The Long Goodbye as a template upon which to riff. A riff of a riff, shall we say. A re-riff. A riff squared. But with one crucial exception. The fun and games metatextuality of The Long Goodbye is bracketed within a mixture of classical and experimental film techniques and a longing for some kind of authenticity even in spite of itself. Altman shoots many scenes through windows and screens, sometimes changing focus from the primary image to the reflection. It reinforces a classic convention of the noir. Not all is what it seems, and we would be foolish to trust our vision to tell us the truth. Paradoxically, to be skeptical of truth claims is in itself a truth, maybe the apotheosis of truth-telling. When we get violence, we get real, palpable, cathartic violence. The ending is one of the unquestionable all-time greats. Elliot Gould is a god of 70s anti-heroes. And even though it's undercut by a hooray for Hollywood reprise, we can't shake its menace. Royal we, folks, I can't shake it. Marlowe, in the last possible moment, emerges from his cocoon of anachronisms and nonchalance and makes himself potent. The use of the gun is him doing, the other thing. Get it? He asserts his manhood finally, and we remember who his neighbors are and what sexual adventures might await him when he gets home. The Big Lebowski sublimates catharsis, some outpouring of the real, through an aesthetic that restrains the characters inside various cloistered spaces, apartments, bowling alleys, diners. Walter's hot-headedness is thus not something to be scared of. He's a jester, and his role is to bring the inappropriate into a context in which it can be made ironic and neutralized. Ironic distancing is all over The Big Lebowski through its blending of the comedic and noir. Brightly lit scenes rub up against Jackie Treehorn emerging like the devil out of deep shadows, expressionistic dream sequences, a POV inside a bowling ball finger hole. Like with all of their movies, such a conflation is in part a branding exercise. Come see the new Coen movie, it's unlike anything else. Iconoclastic, that's the word. A crucial distinction Dussere makes between the two films centers around the word hope. In The Long Goodbye, noir itself is hopelessly compromised as part of a mass production system that can only be seen critically in retrospect. The Big Lebowski suggests that everything itself included, is compromised, but not hopelessly. Its political resistance to commerce takes place through a generic play with noir in which consumption and authenticity are no longer imagined as purely opposed. I often feel when reading this kind of academic language, the hope located in non-binary sites of resistance, the cracks or fissures in the systems of control where alternative ways of being can be nurtured, the tensions between X and Y, or in other words, what the dude is up to. That distinctions without real differences are being proffered in lieu of the brass tacks. Lebowski and the entire Coen filmography is a kind of high-wire act of genre. A lot of noir, some western, a dash of screwball comedy, a dose of whimsy, a pinch of satire. But this genre pileup does not to me suggest any novel political engagement. In the postmodern realm, genre conventions are warped by a sense of suspicion toward truth itself. Both films obey this logic, and The Long Goodbye got there long before. The Long Goodbye represents to me the end of the line, at least as far as we are still inside the same social organizational system from the 1970s to today. And even though the Coens futz with genre is a way of manipulating the code that organizes American myth and mythology, and their often dissatisfying conclusions make it clear that the resolutions of genre narratives are always fantasies of reconciling irresolvable social tensions. It's hard to find examples in their work of positive individual agency that would induce a sense of hope. The best we can do, it seems, is to hold on, not die, and go bowling.
Fuck it, dude. Let's go bowling.
Maybe disappearing in one form or another is a political act? If so, it feels really small.
Oh, hi there, Jeff. How are you?
Reading Dussere's insightful book made me realize what is kind of disturbing about them. Coen movies simply don't end, or at least not well. Over and over again, the point seems to be there was no point.
Hail Caesar, for God's sake.
They are so self-aware, as if speaking in academic shop talk of the postmodern. It's the disease of critique. Any stakes you claim are ripe for falsification, but they are savvy enough to infer that the full postmodern treatment is now equally lame. So, to their credit, the Coens have figured out a genre unto themselves that wedges in between realism and irony. Their preference for fakes and doppelgangers, two Lebowskis being a case in point, testifies to this persistent ambivalence. Dussere writes, "Sometimes a proxy may turn out to be the real thing. But in this world of ours, how would you know? If I have to choose, and I don't really, but why not? Between Altman's caustic repudiation of commercialism and the Coens' ethos of ambivalence, I'll take the former, if only because this expresses a moment of arrival at some kind of insight. Marlowe stares down his betrayer and acts out of pride and personal dignity.
I even lost my cat.
Lebowski is just too damn zen to deliver a cathartic payoff."
Hell yeah!